Alright, hello everybody. Anyways, me posting this video, there's been 11 votes for Speaker of the House. There's going to be a 12th coming up, and still no candidate's gotten that magic number of 218 votes to become Speaker. The conventional wisdom peddled by the legacy media and establishment politicians is that this is a catastrophe of epic proportions. It's the end of the world because nothing will get done, because no bills can be debated or passed through the House, and no new members sworn in until a speaker is elected. Now, to those people I say gridlock's a good thing, believe it or not, because it makes it far more difficult for criminals and demagogues to push through whatever they want. Now, the speakership, which is third in line to the presidency and the most powerful position in Congress, should never have been and shouldn't now continue to be a rubber stamp. The fact that it has been for the past 100 years demonstrates the profound degree of corruption that has plagued this country and is the true embarrassment to this republic as far as I'm concerned. Now, what we're witnessing in real time is a civil war within the GOP between the establishment and the populist wings. Along with the establishment wing of the Democratic Party, it forms a corrupt duopoly that is infecting this country like an unchecked cancer, and the populists, who until fairly recently were led by Donald Trump, it may soon be led by Ron DeSantis. Now, they're a vast improvement over the establishment. They also have their own problems. Trump himself, for example, supported red flag laws, stop and frisk, partially responsible for the out-of-control inflation through his support of the omnibus COVID emergency spending bills, just to name a few examples, and most of them kind of went along with them. But this current fight's ugly, and it can seem petty and pointless, but it kind of needs to happen. I mean, there's this myth that's been part of American politics for a while that if the parties work together, the interests of the American people will be served, but the track record of the last 100 years, really arguably longer than that, seems to say otherwise. Now, during most of this time, the duopoly works together to serve the corporate mafia overlords by letting the Federal Reserve continue to devalue the currency by printing more funny money for their irresponsible deficit spending, and of course to fund their wars of aggression for the empire, such as, Vietnam and Iraq. Curb all civil liberties at home with freedom-destroying policies like the Patriot Act. And while I don't believe the populists are the answer to the mess the establishment have gotten us in, they represent the first significant opposition to the establishment from directly within our political system since the candidacy of Ross Perot in 92 and 96. Now, Perot didn't win on either election. The amount of support he was able to get with all the disadvantages a third-party candidate faces in America really demonstrated how many Americans understood even back then how fundamentally broken the system was. Now, Ross Perot and later Ron Paul running for president really paved the way for Donald Trump's 2016 victory. Now, Ron Paul's very different than Trump, as I've pointed out to many people, and Perot and Trump spoke to many of the same concerns. They opposed illegal immigration, heavily criticized trade deals like NAFTA, and advocated for more protectionist trade policy, criticized foreign policy interventionism, and really advocated for an America First approach to domestic and foreign policy. Now, that's not to say Trump didn't have their differences. Perot took the populism a bit further, I think, by advocating for stuff like term limits for Congress, and also he wanted to allow bills to be proposed directly by the American people via a referendum system. That's kind of like a said system that exists in my state of California, and he's a bit more liberal on some social issues like abortion than Trump. Well, Trump truly doesn't really care about that stuff, but he kind of had to pretend to be to get the Republican nomination. But anyway, back to the speaker election still in progress. Like most elections in this country, the candidates are horrible and don't belong anywhere near the reins of power, and the American people lose, no matter who wins. Now, McCarthy, who is the supposed heir apparent to the unofficial title of King of Congress, often pretends to throw a proverbial bone to the establishment wing, to the populist wing, but, his true loyalty is to the establishment. The runner-up in choice of the Democrats, Hakeem Jeffries, is a younger male and black Nancy Pelosi, basically. He started as a New York corporate lawyer before being elected to the New York State Legislature and then coming to Congress. So he's a bit of a new face, but, basically a classic case of new being the same as the old. Now, he's not as loony as the likes of AOC. He's an opportunist like most politicians, Kevin Hearn, is another one. He's a member of Congress has the dishonor of being the number 7 member of Congress that traded the largest amount of stocks in his 2020 to 2022 term. And like many, I have a lot of conflict of interest concerns over members of Congress being able to trade stocks while in office. We seriously need a constitutional amendment expanding the emoluments clause to members of Congress and all other federal officials. It shouldn't apply only to the president. Now, Hearn himself supporting McCarthy, so it's really a moot point. He doesn't seem to really want to be Speaker anyway, and he seems to have, kind of, have made a deal with, probably made some kind of deal with McCarthy for his vote, like most of these people have. Now, Brian Donalds, he is the MAGA candidate, and he would win the speakership of the populist wing out of power, but is really serving kind of as a protest vote, I think. He would likely be the best of the nominees, but like I said before, the populist wing has their problems as well. And if it were up to me, Congress would get a bit more sassy with the libertarian-leaning Thomas Massie as Speaker, but I doubt that'll happen anytime soon, unfortunately. But hey, it'd be nice to have a Speaker that actually follows the Constitution for once. Been a while since we've had that. Now, we're on the subject of protest votes. Matt Gaetz puts in a vote for Donald Trump as Speaker, and I'm really curious to see if any more votes will come in for him on the 12th, or however many more ballots will be cast before a Speaker's elected. Trump probably won't become Speaker and is not interested in the position, but it does make quite the statement. So what's the point of all this, some of you may be asking? As I've said before, the speakership should not be a rubber stamp. Nobody's owed this position simply because the current rules have it set up to where the House cannot convene without a Speaker elected. The Constitution gives each chamber of Congress broad authority of setting up rules for how they function and the scope of their duties. In other words, this rule can be altered or changed, and likely will be after the Speaker election, though likely in such a way that encourages that rubber stamp approach that I keep saying is the big problem here. Now remember, while there are enough votes to deny McCarthy his coveted Speaker role, the populists and other anti-establishment factions are still outnumbered. McCarthy himself directly worked to sabotage and attempt to purge populists from the GOP, which is the main reason karma has been hitting him in the ass like a ton of bricks in this speakership election. The populists really believe that McCarthy is a dreaded rhino, or Republican in name only for those of you not familiar with that acronym, who's in lockstep with the Democrats. And while I'm not a fan of the term, they kind of have a valid point here, considering how much he's looking out for number one. Now, my prediction for how this will end will be that the establishment Republicans are probably going to make a deal with the Democrats to have enough Republicans, perhaps ones in swing districts, maybe change their votes to Jeffries to end this stalemate and give him the 218 number. Now, due to how closely divided Congress is, Jeffries is neck and neck with McCarthy. Now, the opposite could theoretically happen. Enough Democrats could instead change their votes to McCarthy, but this is much less likely. While the Democrats, in fact, have different factions within their party as well, the Democratic Party currently has much better cohesion within its factions, though such a move would likely undermine that cohesion. The Democrats, quite simply put, have less to gain and more to lose by taking this approach, while the GOP establishment is a classic damned if they do, damned if they don't situation that is truly indicative of why the two-party system needs to go. It's just reason number 1,500,000, and counting. But the Republicans have control of Congress on paper, but the establishment uniparty has most of the control. Though this, as we see with the Speaker election, really it's undermined by factionalism within the GOP. But eventually the Republicans are going to party is either going to collapse or split into different parties. Or the populist wing may take over the GOP much like the Reaganites did in the 1980s and 90s. In either case, you may want to stock up on some popcorn because it's going to be a very interesting next few years or so, and make it even more interesting if the libertarian wing would start to catch up to the populists and influence them. I could certainly only hope that happens sooner rather than later.